In this lesson, we're going to take a look at the property inspector, which is located on the right-hand side. For the most part, the property inspector is going to remain the same, but as I select different elements, you'll notice that it slightly changes. So we're going to go from top to bottom and cover basically everything that's in the property inspector and how it functions, except for a few key things like repeat grid and responsive resize. We'll have those in their own lessons because there's a little bit more to them than the rest of the elements in the property inspector. So let's start from top to bottom. So I'm going to select the square. Up here at the top, we have a number of align tools. If you pay attention to the line in these little icons, that will tell you where they're going to be aligned to. So this is going to align this to the top. This one is going to vertically center this to the artboard. This one's going to be the bottom, the left, horizontally center, and to the right. These other two that are grayed out are for distributing the horizontal and vertical distance between elements. So if I create 3 squares, and I set them at different widths apart from each other, I can select all 3 and then distribute this horizontally, and it will evenly space the spacing in between each of the squares. Same thing goes for the vertical distance. So if I space them uneven, I select all 3, I can go over here and distribute this vertically, and it will automatically space them even. So below the align tools, next to repeat grid, we have these 4 icons, and these are going to adjust some shapes. So here I have these 2 squares that are 38% opacity, just so when we overlap them, you can see the overlap. So if we were to overlap them slightly, select both of them. The first option is going to allow us to add these shapes together to combine this into one shape. If I undo that, the next one is going to subtract. So this is going to take the shape that is on top, in this case that is the blue square, and subtract it from the red square. So we should only have this section remaining, just like that. The next one is going to intersect, and this is going to leave only the overlapping area left. And finally, the last one is the exclude overlap, and it's going to leave this space over here and this space over here, just like that. One thing to note when working in Adobe XD, you're working non-destructively, meaning that this is not permanent. I can double click on this and you'll actually see that both of my squares are still here. Yes, they are the same color, but they are still here. So if I change a shape in a way using those 4 tools that I don't like later on, I can always adjust it just by double clicking to enter the actual group itself. So those are probably the most important to learn up here at the top. Next, we have the width and the height. That's pretty simple. You just change the width and the height of the element. So if I set that to 50, it adjusts it. One thing you want to note is that this lock icon, if you select that, it's going to lock the aspect. So if I change the width now to 50, the height is automatically going to adjust accordingly. Also, we have the rotation value, so if you want to change that manually, you can do that, but you can also do that like I showed you in the other video with the selection tool if you hover over the corner. To show the fixed position, I first need to show you how you can adjust the artboard. So I'm going to select the artboard, and you'll notice here we have the viewport height. So when we select the live preview, the height of the viewport is this height. So if I drag this artboard down, you'll notice we have this dashed line. That is where we're only going to be able to see from here up when this is loaded. So everything below this we'll have to scroll down to get to. And you can also adjust this height by sliding this up and down or by setting it manually over here. And one thing you might want to notice is you can actually change the scrolling to none, which just makes this the full live preview now, and there is no scrolling. I'm going to quickly undo that. And if we select live preview, our square here in the center, as we scroll down, will slowly slide off the screen. But if we fix this, it's going to do exactly what you would expect. It's going to stay exactly in the center of the screen. Also, before we move on, I want to mention that you can do math up here. So if you want to multiply the width, I can put ×2 in here and it will multiply the width. So I'm going to undo that by actually dividing this by 2, and we have our original 251 by 251 square. So for everything below the responsive resize, this will change according to what you have selected. So for this particular square, we can adjust the opacity by changing the slider. We can adjust the border radius from here. So if I type in 50 pixels, it's going to round each corner by 50. Or I can choose to customize each corner individually. So if I want one corner to have 0 round, I can input that manually. For the fill, border, and shadow, you can change the color the exact same way. So you have your color picker and you can adjust the color. And you can change, so if I want a red, I can drag up here. I can add a little bit more black, a little bit more white, or some gray. And you can also change the opacity over here as well. If you like a color, you can add that to the swatches to easily access it, or you can select the eyedropper tool to select a different color somewhere else in your design. For quick color selection, you also have the eyedropper tool out here as well. One thing to note, the border and shadow do not have a drop down up here at the top, only the fill does. You can change this from a solid color to a linear gradient or to a radial gradient. So if I check the border, you'll notice I now have a thin border that's 1 pixel in size all the way around. Let's change this to red so we can easily see it. I can then adjust the size of the border to 10, and the dash is going to be the pixels of the dash. So if I set this to 5, it's going to be a 5 pixel dash. Let's actually lower this down to 5. And the gap, you can also adjust this, but automatically it is set to whatever the dash is set to. These 3 are the caps. So if I round this, you can see it's a rounded cap. Or you can change this to a projecting cap, or just leave it at the standard butt cap. If I go back to my square, I'm actually going to change my border back to a solid. And here you can distribute this if you want this to be on the inside, the outside, or split between. Below the border is the shadow. So if I check that, you can see I have the shadow. You can change the X value, which is then going to move that. Same thing with the Y value. And the blur is how large the blur is. So if I put this at like 40, the blur is going to be massive. And you can also change the color on this as well. So if I want a red, I can do that. And I can also make this lighter or darker with the opacity slider. The last thing I want to show you in the property inspector is when you have text. And when you have text, you have a new text section. Here you can change the font family. You can change the size of the text. And you can change the font weight. You can also align the font to the center, the left, or the right. You can change it from a point text to an area text. And when you change something to an area text, this box is going to define the width of the paragraph. You can underline the text, change the spacing between the letters of the text. So if I set this to 2000, it's going to space it way out. I'm also going to make a second line of text real quick. If you change this, this is going to change the spacing between the line height. So if I set the line height to 70, the line height is then increased. You also have the option of changing the spacing between paragraphs. So if these were 2 body of text, I can increase that to 100, and it even further pushes that down. One more final thing, when you have the artboard selected, you'll notice you have a grid section. When you check this, it's going to give you a grid so that you can then snap things to and keep your designs nice and neat. We will get into using the grid a little bit more when we start designing our apps. That's pretty much it for the property inspector. Again, it's going to change depending on what element you have selected. Everything is very easy to understand. And again, we will cover the responsive resize and repeat grids in just a few lessons. I hope you enjoyed this one. Have a great day, and I'll see you in the next one.